There is something happening inside you right now that no manifestation teacher has ever told you about. And once you understand it, you will never beg the universe for anything ever again. Most people wake up every morning carrying a list, a mental inventory of everything they want but do not have. The money, the relationship, the body, the freedom. And they have been told by coaches, by best-selling books, by viral videos, that if they just visualize hard enough, if they just feel gratitude in advance, if they just raise their vibration long enough, the universe will eventually deliver. But the delivery never quite comes. Or it comes and then disappears. Or it comes in a distorted form that does not feel like what they actually wanted. And then they blame themselves. They say, I must not be doing it right. I must have limiting beliefs blocking me. I must be doing something wrong. But what if the problem has nothing to do with your belief? What if the problem is far more fundamental? What if everything you were ever taught about manifestation was built on a single catastrophic lie? Before we go any further, I want you to do something right now. Go to the comments and type, I am the generator. I am already there. Not because it is a ritual, not because it is magic, but because what those 8 words mean, what they mean at the level of physics and psychology and neuroscience, is exactly what this entire video is about. Type it right now. We are going to come back to it. Because here's the truth that changes everything. The universe does not give you what you want. It gives you who you are. Read that again. Not what you want, who you are. This is not a metaphor. This is not spiritual poetry. This is the most rigorously documented principle in the psychology of human behavior, in the neuroscience of identity formation, and in one of the most debated interpretations of quantum mechanics in the history of modern science. And once you understand it at every single one of those levels simultaneously, you will stop trying to attract things from the outside and start doing something far more powerful. You will start being them from the inside. Let us begin at the beginning. In 1957, a doctoral student at Princeton University named Hugh Everett III submitted a thesis that would be largely ignored for decades before becoming one of the most controversial and influential ideas in theoretical physics. His proposal was called the relative state formulation of quantum mechanics. You may know it by a simpler name, the many worlds interpretation. Everett was trying to solve a problem that had troubled physicists since the 1920s. When quantum particles are observed, they collapse from a superposition of infinite possible states into a single defined outcome. But what happens to all the other possibilities? Where do they go? The standard model, known as the Copenhagen interpretation, gave a simple answer. They disappear. They become irrelevant. There is one outcome, and that outcome becomes reality. Everett disagreed. His mathematics pointed towards something entirely different. Instead of the other possibilities vanishing, they continue to exist. They simply exist in what he called branches. Every quantum event with more than one possible outcome generates a branching of reality. Every single one. And in each branch, a version of you exists who experienced that particular outcome. The version who made the other choice. The version who was in the other place. The version whose life went a different direction. This is not science fiction. This is what the equations describe. And while physicists continue to debate the deeper metaphysical implications, the mathematical structure of Everett's model has never been disproven. Physicist David Deutsch, one of the pioneers of quantum computation at Oxford, has argued extensively that the many worlds interpretation is not just one possible reading of quantum mechanics, but the most logically consistent one, the one that requires the fewest arbitrary additions to the underlying mathematics. What does all of this mean for you? It means that somewhere in the full topology of all possible realities, a version of you already has everything you're trying to create. Not as a wish, not as a distant possibility, as an actuality, as an existing branch of the quantum wave function in which your choices, your identity, and your inner state naturally produce that outcome. The version of you with the financial abundance, the version with the deep, transformative love, the version with the health, the freedom, the creative power, the peace of mind. That person is not a future version of you waiting to be built. That person already exists right now, operating in a parallel branch of the same underlying reality you're standing in. Now, I want to be precise here, because I am not asking you to adopt Everett's interpretation as literal cosmological truth. What I am asking you to use it as is what psychologists call a generative framework, a way of structuring your thinking that produces measurable changes in behavior and outcome. Because this is where the ancient wisdom and the modern science converge in a way that will permanently rewrite what you thought you understood about desire, identity, and power. The Kabbalistic tradition, one of the oldest and most sophisticated mystical wisdom systems in human history, articulated something thousands of years before quantum physics existed that sounds almost identical to what Everett's mathematics eventually described. In the foundational Kabbalistic text known as the Zohar, compiled in the 13th century but drawing on oral teachings far older, there is a foundational concept that reality is not a single fixed line, but a field of infinite possible configurations of divine light. The Hebrew concept of Tzimtzum, developed most fully by Rabbi Isaac Luria, the AriZal, the great 16th century mystic of Safed, describes the original contraction of infinite light to create the space in which finite reality could emerge. And in that space, the Kabbalists taught, every configuration of reality exists simultaneously as potential. The AriZal taught that the role of the human being in this system is not to petition a distant external God for things. It is to align the inner vessel, the inner container of consciousness, with the frequency of the desired reality so that the infinite light can flow into it naturally, without obstruction. This process of alignment and rectification is what the AriZal called tikkun, not the fixing of the world through external action alone, but the rectification and alignment of the soul with its highest, most expanded expression of being. Notice what is completely absent from this model. There is no begging. There is no asking from a place of lack. There is no visualization from a position of separation. There is only alignment. There is only becoming the vessel that can contain what was always available. And this is precisely where the popular version of the law of attraction becomes not just ineffective, but actively harmful. The way the law of attraction is usually presented goes something like this. You are here. Your desire is over there. You need to use your thoughts and feelings to build a bridge between yourself and it. You need to attract it toward you. You need to send the right signals into the universe. And if you do it correctly and long enough, the universe will eventually respond and deliver. Do you see the foundational assumption buried in that model? The assumption of separation. You and your desire are two separate things, occupying two different positions. You are in one location, and your desire is in another. The entire system is built on a gap that you are perpetually trying to close. But that gap is the problem, because the moment you operate from the assumption that your desire is separate from you, your nervous system, your subconscious mind, and your habitual patterns of thought and action all organize themselves around the experienced truth of that separation. You become a person who is always in the process of trying to get something. And a person who is always in the process of trying to get something does not have it. By definition, structurally, neurologically, they do not have it. The very act of reaching for it confirms the belief that it is not here. Dr. Joe Dispenza, a neuroscientist and researcher who has spent 2 decades studying the intersection of neuroscience, epigenetics, and human transformation, has documented this phenomenon in extraordinary detail. In his research, published in works including Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, Dispenza demonstrates that the brain does not clearly distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one in terms of neurological firing patterns. When you imagine something with sufficient detail and emotional engagement, the same neural networks activate as when you physically experience it. But here's the critical distinction that almost no one in the manifestation world properly explains. Dispenza's research shows that the brain does not primarily respond to the content of a thought. It responds to the emotional signature attached to the thought. And the emotional signature of wanting is neurologically completely different from the emotional signature of having. Wanting activates what neuroscientists call a seeking state, a dopaminergic activation pattern associated with pursuit, anticipation, and the particular tension of something not yet secured. Having activates an entirely different neurological signature, one associated with settledness, presence, and satisfaction. When you spend your visualization sessions feeling the excitement of wanting something to come to you, When you feel the longing and the hope and the reaching, you are not programming your subconscious mind for the state of having. You are training it deeper into the state of wanting. And your brain, which is extraordinarily efficient and extraordinarily loyal to the programs it has been given, will continue to produce the inner experience of wanting regardless of what your outer circumstances look like. This is why people can dramatically increase their income and still feel financially anxious. This is why people can find the relationship and still feel fundamentally alone. The outer reality may shift, but the inner program, the baseline identity, did not. This is exactly what the Kabbalistic masters were pointing toward when they distinguished between two fundamental states of consciousness they called Mochin and Mochin. These are states described with great depth throughout Chassidic philosophy, particularly in the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the 18th century founder of Hasidic Judaism, and elaborated in extraordinary detail in the Tanya, the foundational text of Chabad Chassidus written by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Mochin means the consciousness of smallness. It is the contracted state, the fearful state, the state of a person who experiences themselves as at the mercy of external circumstances, who feels separated from the source of abundance, who is waiting, hoping, begging. The person in Mochin is fundamentally defined by what they do not yet have. Mochin means the consciousness of greatness. It is the expanded state, the state of a person who experiences themselves as already connected to the source of all reality, not because their circumstances have changed, but because their identity is shifted at the foundational level. The person in Mochin does not wait for the universe to provide. They operate from the certainty of provision as a present, already existent truth. The Baal Shem Tov taught that the movement between these two states is not primarily driven by external circumstances. It is driven by the internal act of consciousness he called Veikut, which means cleaving, union, direct contact with the divine reality that underlies all appearances. The deliberate act of identifying not with your fears or your lack or your problems, but with the infinite source from which all abundance naturally flows, and which is never separate from your own being. Now, let us bring this into the language of practical psychology and make it something you can actually use. In 1950, psychologist George Kelly introduced personal construct theory, arguing that human beings do not experience reality directly. They experience it through a set of internal constructs, cognitive templates through which all incoming information is filtered, interpreted, and assigned meaning. And Kelly argued that these constructs are not fixed. They can be deliberately, intentionally changed. Building on this foundation, the 20th century teacher Neville Goddard, whose lectures and writings have quietly influenced modern manifestation culture more than almost any other single source, articulated a practice he called the assumption of the wish fulfilled. Goddard's central teaching was simple and radical in equal measure. He said, "You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are. And what you are is not determined by your behavior or your circumstances. It is determined by the state of consciousness you are currently inhabiting." Goddard describes states of consciousness as being like garments. You can take them off and put others on. You are not your current state. You are the infinite awareness that can move between states. And the state he taught was the state of the wish fulfilled, not the wish being fulfilled, not the feeling of it coming, the state of someone for whom it has already happened, the state of someone for whom this is simply normal. That word, normal, is the key to everything. This is what separates the people who create genuine, lasting change in their reality from the people who cycle endlessly through the same patterns. It is not the intensity of their visualizations. It is not the duration of their meditations or the force of their positive thinking. It is normality, the quality of being unremarkably, quietly, ordinarily settled in a particular identity. The neuroscience of habit formation, documented extensively through research at MIT's McGovern Institute for Brain Research and made widely accessible by Charles Duhigg in The Power of Habit, confirms that behaviors become automatic not through emotional intensity, but through repetition and normalization. The behaviors that structurally shape your life are not the ones you feel most passionately about in peak moments. They are the ones that feel so normal they require no effort at all. The ones your nervous system has encoded as baseline reality. The exact same principle governs identity. The identity your brain defends, that your behavior reinforces, that your subconscious organizes your entire life around, is not your aspirational identity. It is not the one you visualize on your best days. It is the one that feels ordinary. The one that is simply there in the background, not requiring any effort to maintain, because it is just the quiet, unremarkable truth of who you are. This is the God state. And I want to be precise about what that phrase means, because it is not arrogance and it is not fantasy. In the Kabbalistic tradition, the human being is understood not as a creature petitioning an external God from outside, but as a being who carries within themselves what the Zohar calls the neshama, the soul breath of the divine itself. The Tanya teaches explicitly that every human soul is literally a portion of God above, a fragment of the infinite light clothed in a finite form for the purpose of this life. The purpose of spiritual practice, according to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is not to reach God from the outside. It is to uncover and operate from the God awareness that already is the deepest, most foundational truth of your own being. When I say the God state, this is what I am pointing to. The state of a person who has stopped experiencing themselves as a small, separate creature waiting for the universe to respond to their requests, and has started experiencing themselves as a center of consciousness from which reality is being actively generated, not attracted, generated. You are not a radio receiver waiting to pick up signals from the universe. You are a transmitter. You are the source of the signal. And the signal you are broadcasting right now, largely unconsciously, moment by moment and day by day, is the broadcast of who you believe yourself to be. So how do you actually enter this state? How do you shift from the consciousness of wanting to the consciousness of already being? The first practice is identity archaeology. Before you can inhabit a new state, you need to become genuinely aware of the state you are currently running. Most people move through their entire lives without once becoming fully conscious of the identity they are automatically operating from. They believe they are making conscious choices moment to moment. But in reality, they are executing a program written years or even decades ago through repetition and emotional imprinting. Dr. Bruce Lipton, a cell biologist whose work on the biology of belief synthesizes decades of cellular research, has documented that approximately 95% of human behavior originates from subconscious programs, most of which were installed before the age of 7 through observation, repetition, and emotional experience. The conscious mind, the part that reads books and watches videos like this one and decides it wants to change, controls roughly 5% of behavior. The remaining 95% runs on autopilot. Identity archaeology means sitting in genuine stillness and asking not what do I want, but what do I fundamentally, automatically, unreflectively believe is true about me? Not the affirmations you recite in the morning, not what you aspire to. The quiet, unguarded, automatic assumption running beneath all of that. The belief that whispers, people from my background do not have that kind of wealth, or love always costs me something, or I have to earn the right to exist comfortably. Those are the programs, and they will override every visualization and every practice you attempt because they are operating at 95% of your behavioral bandwidth, while your conscious intentions operate at 5%. The second practice is what the Kabbalistic tradition calls hitbon anut, which Rabbi Shneur Zalman describes in the Tanya as sustained, penetrating contemplation, not casual thinking, not forced emotional visualization, deep, patient, uninterrupted contemplation of a single truth until that truth becomes self-evident and obvious to the mind. In practical terms, this means choosing one aspect of the identity you wish to inhabit and spending real, undistracted time not imagining the outer outcome, but contemplating the deeper logic of why this identity is already true. If the identity is a person with profound financial freedom, you do not spend this time imagining luxury. You spend it contemplating the unchangeable truth that the same consciousness which underlies all of creation is the deepest core of your own being. That scarcity is a story layered over a reality of infinite provision. That the version of you who has already resolved this question exists right now in the full landscape of possible realities, and that your task is not to create something from nothing, but to close the gap between your current inner experience and that version's inner experience. Not fabrication, recognition. The third practice is the deliberate normalization of the new state. This is the daily, ongoing work, and it is not dramatic. In fact, the entire point is precisely that it is not dramatic. Excitement, euphoria, and emotional intensity signal to your nervous system that something is unusual. And unusual means not normal. And not normal means you have not yet settled into the identity at the level where it actually changes behavior. What you are training for is the quiet, unremarkable certainty of someone who simply knows, the way you know your own name, the way you know what city you live in, not with excitement, not with yearning, simply as the flat, undisputed background truth of your experience. William James, widely regarded as the father of American psychology, wrote in his foundational 1890 work, The Principles of Psychology, that the greatest revolution of his generation was the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. But James was extremely specific about what kind of inner change he was describing. He was not talking about peak moments or intense emotional experiences. He was talking about the settled, habitual background attitudes that operate not in moments of deliberate concentration, but in the idle moments, in the spaces between thoughts, in the quality of ordinary, unremarkable awareness when nothing in particular is happening. This is where the God state lives, not in the dramatic peak moments of practice, in the background, in the idle spaces, in the quiet texture of how you hold yourself when you are not trying. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, one of the most influential spiritual leaders of the 20th century, taught consistently throughout his thousands of recorded discourses that the human being's most profound capacity lies not in what they achieve in moments of extraordinary inspiration, but in what they maintain in moments of complete ordinariness. He described the deepest goal of Chassidic life not as the attainment of transcendent spiritual highs, but as the elevation of the ordinary, the transformation of the background frequency of daily experience from contraction to expansion, from katnut to godlut, from the identity of someone waiting to the identity of someone who already is. Not in the peaks, in the background. And here is what I want to leave you with. You already know what this state feels like. You have been in it. There have been moments in your life when everything felt right, when you moved through the world with quiet certainty, when opportunities seemed to appear naturally, when good things came without you grasping for them, when you were not surprised by things working out because on some level you simply expected them to. You have had those moments. Those were not accidents. They were not luck. They were moments in which the identity you were operating from was expanded rather than contracted. And in that state, without extra effort, your behavior naturally changed. Your perception changed. The options you noticed changed. And the results that followed changed. The invitation of everything you have heard today is not to build something you have never experienced. It is to make permanent what you have only ever experienced temporarily, to take a state you have visited and make it your permanent address, not by forcing it, not by performing it, by settling into it, by excavating the layers of programmed smallness until the greatness that was always underneath, that was never not there, can finally breathe freely. You are not a beggar at the door of the universe. You are the consciousness from which the door, the universe, the desire, and the answer all arise at once. You are not trying to reach the God state. You are simply remembering that you never left it. Go to the comments right now and type, "I am the generator." I am already there. Not as a wish, not as a hope, as a statement of what has always been true. Because it has.